organized by the research network TACK, Communities of Tacit Knowledge, Architecture and its Ways of Knowing, funded by the EU's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme. This is the first talk in the second round of TACK talks titled How To, A Guide Through Knowing. Following last year's talks where we asked the architectural practice partners in the network, how do we know? In this series, we ask our three cultural partners, Het Nieuwe Instituut, Architektuurcentrum Wien, and Vlaams Architectuurinstituut, how to. In conversations between the cultural institutions and the PhD candidates in the network, we will discuss and open different perspectives on mediating tacit knowledge in architecture in the context of cultural institutions through curatorial, archival, and design-based practices in exhibitions, archives, publications, and public programs. We hope that you'll also be able to join us for the upcoming talks in the series, which will question how to archive embodied knowledge and how to define what belongs where on Thursdays, 25th of March and 8th of April. In today's talk, How to Choose the Expert, we will approach the notion of expertise from different sides. I'm joined by architectural historian Monica Platza, who is curator and head of collections at Architektuurcentrum Wien, and graphic designer Morin, who is the art director at Het Nieuwe Instituut, who will both give a short 10-minute presentation reflecting on how to choose the expert and their individual practices. Responding to the presentations, we have Claudia Mainardi, who is a PhD candidate at the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies at Politecnico di Milano, and Hamish Lonergan, who's a PhD candidate at the Department of Architecture at ETH in Zurich. My name is Anna-Liebe Wörsel, and I'm a PhD candidate at the School of Architecture at KTH, Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, and I will be moderating our talk this evening. We will begin with two 10-minute presentations from Monica and Morin, then followed by a response from Claudia and Hamish, and then we'll open up for questions for anyone who'd like to join in into the conversation. And if you have any questions throughout the presentations or following conversation, just please write these in the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar, and then I'll bring these up and post them throughout the talk. So I'll just introduce Morin briefly before giving the word to her and her presentation. So Morin studied graphic design at the Willem de Kooning Academy, Rotterdam. Her work focuses on dealing with questions of representation. She independently develops corporate designs, books, and print material, especially for cultural institutions, such as the Holland Festival, Maris Center for Contemporary Culture Maastricht, and the initiative If I Can't Dance, I Don't Want to Be Part of Your Revolution. She also designs artist books. She was one of the exhibiting artists of Opera Aparte / Loose Work in the Dutch Pavilion at the 54th Biennale di Venezia. Morin has been responsible for the visual identity and works as an art director for Het Nieuwe Instituut Rotterdam since October 2013. From 2011 to 2014, Morin taught at the Art EZ Institute of the Arts Arnhem and the Faculty of Graphic Design. In addition, she taught from 2011 to 2014 at the Werkplatz Arnhem in typography, and since 2014, she is the professor of system design at the Academy of Fine Arts Leipzig. Morin lives and works in Amsterdam and Leipzig, and we're so glad that you were able to join us today, Morin.
Thank you, Anna. So, thank you all for joining. Thanks for inviting me. I have to apologize a little bit that I will share a little bit of an improvised presentation. I did not make like a perfect PowerPoint or keynote or whatever, since quite a stupid reason, but I have a broken wrist on my right hand, so I'm a little bit handicapped at the moment and not really trained in using my left hand on the computer. So I will just do it what was available in my computer and prepared or is online. Maybe it's good. I'm gonna share my screen. So it will be bits and pieces of what's happening on my screen. So I don't know if you're all familiar with the Het Nieuwe Instituut, which is based in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, sorry. Really big mistake. And anyway, it's an institute for architecture, design, and digital culture. This is the building. And we're going to... So what actually I would maybe could explain a little bit what I'm doing, because I think it's not very common to have me as a graphic designer, as an art director in the New Institute. The idea actually of the Guus Buimer, the director of the New Institute, was to work with a lot of graphic designers. So not particularly having one identity, but just to work with a lot of designers. So graphic designers, but also spatial designers. And for this, actually, he invited me to become the art director for it. So that actually I'm the one who's responsible for it. And I'm the one who's also inviting, in collaboration, of course, with the project team, inviting the designers or architects or spatial designers or graphic designers to work on specific projects. So that was actually a starting point. And the New Institute didn't exist at that moment. So it was new, combined out of 3 former institutes, which was the Dutch Art Institute, the Dutch Architecture Institute, and Premsla Stichting for design, and Virtual Platform for the digital cultural sector. So this became the New Institute, and then this idea working with lots of graphic designers. So I had to come up, of course, with an idea also to make clear that the messenger is Het Nieuwe Instituut. So I came up actually with an idea to make a label. And this is what you see here on this poster, which is designed by Bart de Baats. And then you see the black label, which has information about who is designing it, the New Institute, and everybody involved. Normally you would put that somewhere really small at the back, but since it is really an idea to work with so many designers, I choose to make it more prominent, and also to make the label quite prominent, because I thought, like, if I make a logo, then we would become almost more like a sponsor of a project. And we're not a sponsor, we are the initiator. So this is actually just an example of a project by the period rooms by Andreas Angelicades. Here you see more of it. This was actually the exhibition itself. I'm not going into all these projects, but I actually would like to share more the variety of all these projects, the variety of all the designers and architects and we work with. So this was also a series of projects which were all embraced under the umbrella of the body. So here again, you also see the label, which in this case is transparent. So again, and this is a campaign for the Temporary Fashion Museum. Actually, this was a campaign designed by myself. So again, the label is also transparent. So in a way, why I'm showing this is also to indeed, again, like show the variety of all of them. And this was actually for the online campaign. And here is how we deal in the exhibitions itself, also with the graphic design layers in it. And this was all for the Temporary Fashion Museum. And this is a project I would like to talk a little bit more about it. This is called the Speculative Design Archive, done by a studio of Veronica Ditting, where actually she wanted to share also the notion of an archive. This exhibition was mainly put on the agenda because in the Netherlands we do not have a design archive at the moment. So that was one of the reasons. This is the campaign, and then I will go to some images. Sorry, this is yeah, here. So this is the exhibition itself, which is designed by Roel Huisman and Bart van Meerode. And it almost became a building with 3 layers because it was about a design archive. So what they wanted to show is actually 3 layers. So it's more the storage space, and next to the storage space, more the research space, and then the display space. So here we see all these. So this space is actually more like the research. So in a way, what we wanted to do with this exhibition is, of course, to tell the story also about behind and about the whole thing behind an archive itself, and to share all these archive from all these different designers which are involved here. So it's again like all different graphic designers, but also like object designers, so all different. And in a way, what we wanted to do with this exhibition, so not only showing these objects, but actually to show these objects in space. So this is one exhibition. Another exhibition I would like to share with you is I see that I see what you don't see. So this is done by Rudy Gutsch and Olivier Goethals. Olivier Goethals, he is actually the spatial designer, and Rudy, he is the graphic designer. So he actually developed an identity for this exhibition, which of course is also dealing immediately with seeing and not seeing. Here we see the images of the exhibition itself, which is more like a panorama. So it's a circle where all the, actually all the artworks were on screens within this circle space. And outside of the circle space, there was also, so this was also done by Rudy to cover actually the windows. So this is IC. I'm not going to share the graphic design, etc., because that's not in my presentation yet. Or another exhibition which is now actually in the new institutes, which is called Lithium. It is about the lithium, you know, the product, you could say. And this exhibition is designed by Katrien Bombe, and she did the spatial design. She actually has a background, or actually she is designing mainly for theaters. So she's not an architect. And this was also a reason why we wanted to ask her, because we were interested in to make a space which is experiencing you the idea of a spa. So we thought, like, how can we also do that with somebody who's actually coming from a different background and working in a different environment, so who is maybe more to see actually if this will work. So she's not an architect, and she's maybe more trained into to make certain spaces which, maybe with less abstraction. So we were interested in seeing like how that will work. And she did that together with Austin Redman, who is the graphic designer. So he did the typography, etc., of course, and she did the spatial design. So this is, of course, the entrance where you enter with the reception. So this is the mineral spring. This was also because lithium is also in mineral water. So that was also one of the reasons to share that as well. So here, this space. This was more the outside space in a spa where you're able to, these were like steam baths. Okay. And this is more the end of lithium. And then I'm gonna show something completely different, which is also an exhibition, which is now in the new institute. So it's almost the opposite of lithium, also in atmospheres and treatments. And this exhibition, it's called Art on Display. It's actually Dirk van de Heuvel, many of you probably know. He is the curator of this exhibition, together with Panoply Curtis. This was a collaboration with the Gulbenkian Museum. And this exhibition was about the display of exhibiting. That's, of course, also the title, Art on Display. And with architects from 1949 till 1969. So with architects like Scarpa, Albini, Lina Bobardi, Aldo von Eyck, and the Smithsons. And in this case, we have asked Jo Tailleux, which in this case was even the suggestion or the idea of Dirk. So in that sense, he proposed, maybe we should ask Jo Tailleux, and I'm a really big fan of the work of Wildevink Tailleux. So I thought immediately it's super great and it's interesting. So Jo was also immediately interested in working in it, and he made his own interpretations in a way of the former the former designs by these architects. So in a way, what he did, because this exhibition was also being presented in Gulbenkian, but in the Gulbenkian, it was much more trying to do a one-on-one way of presenting it. And I think in our case at the New Institute, we wanted also to have more the voice of Jo Tailleux in this case, like how he was treating it. So for instance, Jo actually used the same material everywhere. So yeah, so it's more about like how the space itself experience. And then we have the artworks also from the Gulbenkian in here. And the graphic design was done by Goda Budjev, which do not have here. And I think on these images, it's also not present, which is quite interesting because it's quite in there, the graphic layer. So I think these are examples of exhibitions that we do at the New Institute, and that's how we actually, you know, all the time work with different architects, designers, etc. So sorry, it's just a little bit chaotic, but
Thank you so much, Morin. That was great to see, and no need to apologize. It was a really great view into a lot of different aspects of the institution, and different types of public-facing things. And I think all of us are made me miss even more, like being able to go to exhibitions. Hopefully all of us will be able to be in these exhibitions physically again sometime in the near future. That would be very nice. I'm gonna go straight on and give the word to Monica. One second. Yes, Dr. Monika Platza studied art history at the University of Vienna. She's a curator at the Architekturzentrum Wien and heads its collections department. International curatorial activity of hers at leading institutions such as Canadian Centre for Architecture and the Getty Research Institute. Her exhibitions include Cold War and Architecture, Contributions to Austria's Democratization After 1945, Vienna, the Pearl of the Reich, Planning for Hitler, A Show, Austrian Architecture in the 20th and 21st Centuries, Lessons from Bernard Rudowski, Shaping the Great City, Modern Architecture in Central Europe, 1890 to 1937, and Kinetism, Vienna Discovers the Avant-Garde. Monika Platza is the editor of ICAM Print, the Journal of the International Confederation of Architectural Museums. In 2014, she was visiting scholar at the Center of European Studies, Harvard University. Her current research focuses on transnational architectural history, which was the subject of her latest publication, Cold War and Architecture, The Competing Forces That Reshaped Austria After 1945, published by Park Books in 2019. All right, Monika, so I'm gonna, hand over the word to you. You're muted, just to.
Okay, well, thank you, Anna, for the nice introduction and for the invitation. And just before I start my talk, I also like to at least throw in one slide. Maybe not all of you know the Architekturzentrum Wien, which is located at the Museumsquartier, the former imperial stables in the midst of Vienna, and is the Austrian Museum of Architecture. And besides exhibitions, we have various other interesting formats to communicate what architecture is and can do. Okay, now I'm going to move on. I will show our engagements. I will concentrate actually on two exhibitions, which I did a couple of years ago. And the first one, you will see the two architects, Polar, who actually did the installation for the Rudowski exhibition, enjoying the space. Bernard Rudowski was the hero of many of the Austrian architects, but also international, and did a huge exhibition at the MAC in '87, which also Margot and Siegfried, who the architects you just saw, influenced them. They were at that time students, and the Sparta Sybaris exhibition was quite exceptional in showing architecture in general. And Bernard Rudowski, as I said before, was born in Vienna in 1905, and he left Austria and Vienna in the 30s, moved on to Italy, then to South America, the US. His architectural oeuvre is rather small, but he's very well known as cultural critic and as exhibition maker and display. And I'm sure most of you know his most famous exhibition, Architecture Without Architects, which he did for the MoMA in '64. And it was a widely traveled exhibition. So when we did the exhibition, I did it together with Wim de Mit from the Getty Research Institute, because the Rudowski estate is housed at the Getty. It was quite a challenge. First of all, it was the first time in an exhibition on Bernhard Rudowski. And how do you approach an exhibition about a man who himself is so famous about his exhibition display. So the interesting thing was, or how I really got engaged in it, when I met his wife, Berta Rodowski. You can see her here in Capri and in Procida, where she lived with Bernhard Rodowski in the early 30s. What she's wearing, by the way, is a fabric by Josef Frank, another famous Austrian architect, and they lived a very bohemian way of life. And we were lucky to have then one coat also in the Frank fabric at the exhibition, which you can see on the right-hand side. So I met Berta in 2002. And before we even thought about making an exhibition, we started making a film with Berta Rodowski, Margot and I, Margot Fürtsch, who is part of the Polar Architects. And we traveled with Berta. Berta had 3 places where she lived throughout the year. That was in Frigliana, where Bernhard Rodowski in the 70s built a house, and they retired there. Then she lived in New York and in Vienna. So we followed her around. We did oral history. She explained the oeuvre, her role, her position. And then we created a movie, which is about 50 minutes long, with the title, My Best Career Was as Bernhard's Wife. So that was kind of the expert eyes I kind of engaged with the oeuvre of Bernhard Rodowski. And we started the exhibition actually with the film. You can see here on the left-hand side, so Berta was really the first expert I met. And before I then engaged with the material and the archives. And of course, as you can also see within the installation, it's the complete opposite of Bernhard Rodowski's installation, because we decided together with the architects, you don't want to mimic the Rodowski display and create environments and so on. So we decided completely against that and took a very strict, we called it the lessons from Bernhard Rodowski, and we kind of had 7 lessons. We kind of followed through in a very rigid, linear way. The interesting thing for me in this exhibition, and also kind of our dialogue with the architects and the graphic designer, which was Gabi Lenz, was we didn't focus so much on the architectural oeuvre, but we also kind of displayed sandals, shoes, fashion, or also many photographs in that sense, which embodied Bernhard Rodowski's way of looking at architecture. And I think that was kind of the difficult thing for us at the beginning in a general, a straightforward architecture museum. How can you display this kind of very broad, pluralistic approach to architecture? But that's also what we really wanted to communicate to the audience, and it went really very well. At the same time, it was important for us to locate Bernhard Rodowski in the cultural setting of Central Europe, and to show through his travel sketches, through the archival materials, his links, his cultural links to many, to the Austrian Central European culture. Completely different is the next exhibition. It's not focused on a monographic architect. It's a thematic exhibition. As you can see here, it focused on the metropolitan area of Vienna, the plannings during the Nazi regime. And it was the first time that the material, we were able to show that kind of material, and it all links back to the expert you see on the left-hand side. That's Klaus Steiner, Klaus Steiner is an architect and spatial planner. He had a high rank position at the municipality of Vienna. And he started to collect that material from the 70s onwards. It's interesting, he has a very, besides his professional interest, he also had a personal and private interest. Both of his parents were ardent followers of the National Socialistic Party. And so he personally was very much engaged to work himself through that family history. And we also started off kind of, besides it, making oral history with him and interviews and how he collected it, where he got the material from and so on. Altogether, then he gave us the material for our collection in 2011, and it consists about 5,000 items. So it's really a quite extraordinary collection, but it was totally unsorted. So we then, I then asked an architectural historian, a colleague of mine, Ingrid Holtschuh, who is the co-curator, and she started to inventory the material because we really didn't know what actually was in there piece by piece. After we did that, it took about 2 years. In 2017, I think it was, we kind of asked a team, Gabo Heindl and Teolodi Tershi, the graphic designers, a very political engaged team of professionals. How can we explain that kind of contested material in the space? How do we deal with that? So we started with mock-ups and so on. And there were quite heated discussions, and then we decided to use a photo, an installation photo from the first anti-fascist exhibition held in Vienna in 1946 as a reference point. So it was kind of a reenactment in the installation. That was really also the first time since I did an exhibition that the graphic designer and the architect would also write a statement within the exhibition. You can see it on the boards. Why is this exhibition pink? It's titled. And that was really very important to kind of also communicate that kind of to deal with this material is not finished yet. It's just the beginning. So that's why we wanted to kind of use the installation kind of environment. You can see on top of the paint is not completely finished yet. So that was the purpose behind. And of course, the color is a very strong statement. The interesting thing is that it's the color is kind of also double coded because it also comes because, you know, interleaves, archival interleaves are also pink. So that's also part why we chose that color as well. It was, here you can see the statement again, and it was really also important for us because to communicate to the audience that these plans, which seem so innocent in a way, here you can see infrastructure, train stations and so on, that these buildings or these plans, which are very modern in character, but they don't really show the labored work behind it and all these kind of contested context. So this was really, we were very concerned about that, and it was important for us in order to communicate also this context and also to question the role of the architects on this occasion. And you can see here also the movies we showed. For example, Albert Speer talks here in a rare interview. You had to look down. You didn't have to look up. Then all the tables and furniture, we kind of spaced in the room and never in a linear order or anything. So it was always kind of a little bit out of the line in order to kind of counterbalance the rigor of the politics behind that kind of fascist movement. And it was also important for us to move outside of the space where we are located, where the museum is located. It was also part during this area that there were major exhibitions held during the Nazi regime. So we also kind of contextualized the space where the exhibition took place, and we kind of communicated that outside. Because what's also important to say, when we staged this exhibition, it was the 150th anniversary of the Ringstraße. So kind of showing this exhibition was also creating a counter narrative to the canon of the architectural history in Austria, and also kind of the Ringstraße in a way, which was also very important demonstration object during the Nazi regime. So that was also the idea behind this exhibition. Yeah, and I think that was my last image. Yeah. I can stop this now. Just to give you a short overview, the different kind of experts you can use, yeah, within these two exhibitions.
Thank you so much, Monica, for your presentation. It was really great and so interesting to see. I think both of your presentations gave like a really wonderful view into the diversity that architectural exhibitions or exhibitions about architecture can be, like how many different ways they can take form, and so that was really nice. I'm gonna pass the word on to Claudia and Hamish for any questions and comments, and likewise, any of you in the audience watching, if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the Q&A. But I'm going to pass the word on to you, Claudia. I don't know if you have any,
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Morin and Monica, for the great, inspiring, and very generous presentation. Well, let's say that from what you presented us, it seems in a way that both your institutions regularly work with a variety of external experts, and so ranging from exhibition designers and architects, but also graphic designers, invited speakers, writers, and so on. So my question is, how do you choose these teams of external experts? Do you have like a set of criteria, or they come mainly from your local network? Or again, it is more about setting goals and using your own trained sensibilities to find an appropriate expert. Thank you.
Okay, shall we start to answer?
Start. Yeah.
Now, I mean, the first thing, of course, is that we always dive into the topic itself. Like, what is it about? And also what the aim is with this exhibition. So in terms of the exhibitions I have shared, I mean, the 10-minute presentation is so short. So, I mean, I felt like I could not say anything. But if you look at, for instance, with the exhibition of lithium, it was like I tried already to explain, where we wanted to, the aim was also to create this atmosphere of a spa. So in that sense, it was, it was also clear that we wanted to have somebody who's capable of doing that and who's also interested in doing that. And I think, for instance, with art on display, where it's so much about architecture, it's also about architects who are making exhibitions also from the past. So in that sense, it was also immediately clear that it would be interesting to ask another architect, and you would never ask, you know, like somebody who is in theaters. So it's yeah, in that sense, it's, I think it comes from like what the aim is with this specific exhibition and who fits in the topic, you know, like who also has an interest in it. And I think it's the same for the graphic designers. So although I think with graphic design, especially I'm a graphic designer myself, and maybe I also like that a lot about being a graphic designer, that you also have to deal with so many different topics. So because you always have to deal with content from others. So in a way, I think many these graphic designers are capable to dive into certain topics but then it's also more about like, do we want to have a graphic designer who's very present, or do we want to have something very subtle, or is it somebody who is really experienced in certain things? Like, is it really, is what is the focus? Is the focus on websites? Is the focus on, I don't know, all these questions. And then there are also some pragmatical ones, which are also important, you know, like how much time is there? So yeah, like how much time is there left to work with somebody who, wherever is. So I think there are lots of elements which are important to come up with a certain decision, like about who to ask. So content-wise, availability, practical things, interest, and form. So yeah, I think that's basically my answer.
Yeah, I mean, Morin, you covered it pretty well. I would say content-based is, of course, the most important thing. It's very much the decision of the curators to kind of come up with kind of names, and then kind of we discuss it in a team. And sometimes for bigger exhibitions and so on, we've also done pitches. So we kind of invite 3 architect teams and so on, and then we decide. So that's also an option what can do. And maybe Morin, what you haven't said so far, besides that, what I think is also very important is getting along and being open for dialogue, because and to have a really pleasant work environment, because I think that's a very important thing. It's a teamwork to make exhibition, but that's the challenging and also the interesting part. And for me also the inspiring part, because as a curator, I come up with a concept, but then in the dialogue with the architects, with the graphic designer, things change and move around, and that's always very rewarding due to spatial restrictions, but I also so very pragmatic things, costs, whatever. But I always really enjoy how graphic designers and architects also then take a stand towards the concept, towards the objects and so on. And that's always very enriching at the end for me as a curator.
I agree indeed that it's also indeed important to get along. But I mean, like I always say, like how we do it at the New Institute, we never make our lives easy. Because we always are trying to work with new people. So that means you always have to, you know, start a relationship again. And yeah, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it's more difficult. Mm-hmm. So it's, and of course there are a few people who we, you know, like that maybe we will work with them again. But on the other hand, there are also many who, yeah, that we the aim is also to all the time also work with other people. So also to give other people the possibility of working on this. So also to be able to give these assignments for both graphic designers and spatial designers and architects.
Mm.
But
Yeah, I mean,
it's not, I mean, it's not easy. So, because sometimes you think, this is great, we just would like to continue this, and that it never stops.
Yeah, maybe I should mention that as well, that of course we also, every exhibition works, we have different designers and graphic designers, so it's the same kind of thing both of us seem to be doing.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Hamish, did you have a comment?
I think that idea of dialogue and cooperation that you just spoke about is really fascinating to me. But I think, I found it particularly interesting that both of you spoke about recent exhibitions that you've done, which were in fact exhibitions about exhibitions. And it made me think about the way that you're not, this dialogue isn't just occurring between your expertise now, but you're also in this, of course, in a constant dialogue with the material of your collections and the kind of expertise of the people that you're looking to, you know, Rudowski's expertise, and also Morin in the art on display, that there was this dialogue between the expertise of the architect today, but also Bobardi and the other experts in the past. So I was interested in how you balance in that both of your institutions have this interesting interplay, I think, between a really exciting historical basis, but also you're both really interested in the contemporary display and the kind of art of displaying, and how you kind of navigate or balance or create a dialogue between the historical and the contemporary, and, you know, these experts that are in two different times.
Thank you, Hamish. Monica, do you want to respond to start with?
Yeah, I mean, that's of course has to do with programming in that sense. So we do a mixture out of contemporary approach exhibitions. And then, of course, now since I'm here as the head of collections, I've shown you kind of exhibitions I've done. But of course, we, for example, at the moment, very contemporary exhibition, Land for All, is on display. But on the other hand, I think what's also important is, I think an exhibition is always contemporary, because I mean, I'm a contemporary person, or I look at it with contemporary eyes, and maybe in 5 years somebody else would make a Rudowski exhibition, which of course would look completely different. So I think I never kind of like that distinction between historical and contemporary, because I think it's always both, and also the contemporary is historical in a way, because and contextualized. So maybe it's like, you know, a classical music and pop music, the distinction blurred too. So maybe we should also start doing that with exhibitions. Because I think sometimes historical exhibitions are very contemporary.
Thank you, Monica. Morin, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I understand, of course, what Monica is saying, and but also to make clear, of course, I'm an art director, and I'm not responsible in that sense for the content of these exhibitions. So I think Dirk van der Heuvel could answer much better this question, but I think for the new institute itself, regarding to art on display, of course, but I think to the new exhibition itself, we also have, of course, a really big archive of architecture, so which plays very often a role in the exhibitions itself. So I think very often it's combined, you know, like indeed the contemporary perspective, but I agree with Monica, we live in 2021. So, and I think especially with art on display, it's just interesting to see, for instance, the approach of the Gulbenkian. I mean, I haven't seen it in real myself, but only on images. And I think how we did it at the New Institute already shows a difference, huh? Like dealing with the same kind of content in a way, but treating it completely different, which of course also has to do with the designer, the expert, in a way you invite. So, and I think in our case, we were also interested in the voice of Jo Tailleux in this case. So, yeah. Does that answer a little bit your question?
Definitely. No, I think that's really fascinating, the balance that both of the institutions strike between avoiding the contemporary and historical binary. But yeah, this sort of, you're giving the expert a role in both senses. Yeah, very interesting.
Claudia, do you have, yeah, can I give the word to you again?
Sure. Well, I will be, well, there is many other things I would be interested in asking you. So I just, let's say, pick one of them. In terms of audience, I would be interested in understanding a bit more, let's say, the specificities of both the two institutions. I mean, if you think that it generally changes depending on the exhibition subject, or, for example, if you felt the fact that it changed over time, and which kind of, let's say, knowledge or expertise do you assume, in a way, from your audience, if I explain myself well. So, in a way, indeed, do you recognize target in your audience and to whom you are generally referring through your researches and exhibitions?
Maybe I can say that, sorry.
No, go ahead, Morin.
Yeah. No, I can already say that I'm not the expert in that sense. So, but yeah, of course, this is, you know, like a topic which is going on all the time, also within the communication department and within the program department. Like, okay, indeed, who's the audience? And I think it varies. So sometimes I think first of all, it is already a smaller group who are interested in architecture, design, and digital culture. So it is not like a broad art museum, you know. So I think that there is already a selection of people who have a certain interest in these topics. And then, of course, there are exhibitions which indeed maybe ask maybe some more knowledge, but I assume, you know, that I think there will always, they try to communicate within at least the text which they provide to make it accessible for as many people as possible. But I'm sorry, there's a lot of noise in the kitchen. They are cooking. So. But yeah, so yeah, I think sometimes it is more easy or accessible, and sometimes indeed it asks more knowledge, or maybe more that you have to dive into it, that maybe you have to go more in depth. So I would not say that all the exhibitions at the New Institute are in a way very easy. So indeed it asks quite some effort, at least. So maybe not always about knowledge, but it asks effort.
Monica, do you want to, oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, first of all, I never like the word target, the audience, because that's kind of, yeah, conveys a certain intent. So I like, we like to communicate to a very broad audience in general. And that was interesting for me to see the change more or less when the Architekturzentrum started. It was, of course, much more focused at the beginning to a professional audience, architects, designers, and so on. But that really changed over the years. And also when we started building up a collection, and now we really try to communicate as broad as possible, but because I think we also want to, I mean, in a more or less that architecture is more than just, you know, plans which might be difficult to read and projects and so on. So putting up shows like Rudowski, of course, there we address a completely different approach to architecture. The same thing is, of course, when you do historical, political, contextualized exhibitions, you reach another audience. But what we always do, and as curators, we also have to, we have an education department, which is quite strong, and they have to engage with teachers, they have to do children workshops and so on. And that's for more or less all of our exhibitions. Mm-hmm. So we are challenged also as curators by the education department to kind of, put the content for hopefully as many people as possible.
Thank you so much, Monica. We have a question from Candia, who's watching the talk, which I think links really well to this that we're talking about right now, and also linking to this you're talking about the working as a team in an exhibition. But she asks a question on communicating intentions and asks, how do you share your intentions with the experts that you're working with for an exhibition? Are these intentions sort of guidelines along the collaboration, or rather a starting point that evolves with the expert? I guess it's, as I read it, a question about how do you communicate to the people that you work with in these teams what it is you want the material, for example, you, Monica, as a curator, what it is that you want the material in an exhibition to communicate to the audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a very, so it's not a guideline we give them. That's actually discussed how the works is displayed and what they communicate for each individual exhibition. That's up for negotiation. Because it really depends, are the things framed? I mean, it starts with these little things, or as I said, very basic things, or the graphic design, what materials you use, what colors you use. That's something which really comes up in the discussion. So we work very much on workshop-based things where we really spend at the beginning, for example, I mean, the curator has an idea, then he kind of presented that idea, and then we start with the discussion in the team. And then things evolve. That's more or less how it begins.
Great. Morin, did you have a comment as well?
Yeah, I think it's similar. I would definitely say it's the second one, indeed, starting a conversation. So of course, I mean, we also have very often, or at least I have in my mind very often, like we try to involve them as soon as possible, the graphic designer and the spatial designer, because I think it's important, you know, to indeed have them within the dialogue. But sometimes maybe you also ask them too early. So it's always a little bit like, what is the right moment, you know, like, is there enough information for them to start, or is it? So I think that's also interesting to see. But indeed, the aim is to invite them as soon as possible, because indeed we see this whole theme as, you know, that a collaboration. So I think everybody is as important.
Great, thank you so much. I think we have time for one last question. I don't know if Hamish or Claudia, one of you have. I also no, actually, we just got another question from Magita Buchert in the audience. She says, or she asks, which relevance has knowledge generation besides the concern for communication? Which I guess, yeah, which relevance does the knowledge generation, like the knowledge that's generated in the institutions and through these exhibitions, what relevance does it hold rather than just sharing it with other people, communicating it?
That's a great question, and for me that's very important. Because it's not just the exhibition of it. I mean, before you exhibit something, you do research. Or you kind of discover something. kind of a new archive, a new person, a new topic, which is relevant. But then it's also something about maybe correcting a canon, reframing something, or kind of setting the topic as well. I mean, so it's much more, and actually what we really want, besides what we both of us haven't really talked about it, it's not just the exhibition or the catalog. There are tours, other programs, kind of very general ones like symposias and so on. But we engage with these topics. Also then we continue to engage with these topics. We not just show them and communicate them, but we kind of create a deeper expertise later on in various topics, or maybe research projects, or with students, universities who kind of continue writing their thesis or their PhDs, or through lectures and so on. So that's very, I think, very important. And I think for Morin, for your institution, of course, I think as well.
Yeah, it's the same. We even have like a whole research department. So yeah, and actually this research department is also providing, you know, they doing for certain topics, they do this research, but also even public. So sometimes they also do the whole research within events and within different kind of events. And then this results in sometimes in exhibitions, or even sometimes exhibitions where the research is not even ended. For instance, with lithium, it's still going on. So, but indeed, it's like similar as what Monica is saying.
Yeah, and of course, also what you do with your lithium exhibition, or we are doing now with the Land for All exhibition. I mean, we're also in a way a little bit policy makers. It's not just research, but it's also kind of engaging with politics, kind of interest groups in that sense, to engage and to change something, and also kind of to move forward and make sure that architecture kind of is an important part of the dialogue, whatever. I think that's a very, I mean, that's why we're here. It's also communication, more or less. And that's very contemporary, I would say.
I wonder if I could ask a quick follow-up question.
Yeah, of course.
We have time. I find that I think it's really fascinating the way you speak about perhaps the exhibition generating a kind of a particular type of knowledge, you know, in its public-facing aspect, that, as you say, Monica, that it plays a policy role. But I wonder if you could speak more about kind of what does the exhibition generate that's specific in terms of knowledge? Does it generate a kind of spatial knowledge that is different to another form of research, or does it generate a conversation, or, you know, what's specific about the exhibition, do you think?
Well, I don't think it's just something you read. Doesn't it also, you move through a space in an exhibition, but then we also go outside. I mean, so our exhibitions is always when I, for example, the Nazi planning and so on, then we start in the exhibition, but then we took the people outside and talked about the visible and invisible plannings. And I think maybe the people who then joined these tours, whenever they walk through that kind of spatial environment, knowledge happens more or less, or you perceive spaces differently. And I think it's experience architecture in an exhibition, walking through the exhibition, but then also moving around anywhere, which I think is crucial. And that's different to just research or writing and reading. It's the experience, actually, we try to communicate.
Morin, do you have a comment as well?
Yeah, no, I think it's, again, this is also, of course, not really my expertise in that sense, but I think very often also with all these exhibitions, there's a whole program around it. So, and not just one evening, but, you know, like there's always a whole program around the topic, like what is being shown. So an exhibition is just one part of it. And yeah, but it's also really about like indeed sharing and developing the content also afterwards. I think quite often it's also a starting point and not really an end. So we hardly have display exhibitions. A display, when it's very much about like the end product. And very often it's more like a story to put on an agenda indeed, or to, you know, like to put somewhere to start to discuss this. Yeah. So in that sense, I think it's quite similar as also what Monica is saying.
Great, thank you. I think we're already running almost 10 minutes over time. I know this is a very short talk. We could go on talking about this for a long time, but let me just. We just got one more question from. So we might we'll squeeze that in before we end off. Margita Buchert asks or poses the question: staging can be a knowledge generator in itself via perception. Which I don't know if any of you have an immediate response to, or if it's maybe a comment we can let kind of
dive in.
Yeah that we can think about for future talks as well. But thank you so much for your questions, Margita. So yeah, I think we'll leave it there so we don't run too long over time. But thank you all for taking the time to join us today, and thank you Monica and Morin and Hamish and Claudia for your presentations and your questions and conversation, and also thank you for to the audience for asking questions. And then we hope that you all want to join us for the next tech talk, and that we can continue the conversation either in the next talks or maybe sometime in the future, maybe even in person someplace in the world. We'll see. The next talk in the series is how to archive embodied knowledge, which will take place in 2 weeks on Thursday, the 25th of March at 6 p.m. Central European Time. And this one can also be accessed through the TACK website like this one. All the talks are also recorded and will be available for YouTube if you're missing any of them. So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for this evening, and yeah, goodbye for now, and hopefully we'll see you soon again in the future.